All right, hey guys, we're back, and I just wanted to give you a fun fact that President Grover Cleveland did not die while in office. Okay, so picking up with the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights is ratified, added to the Constitution in 1791. As you saw in the reading, and I think they've discussed it in the last chapter, there were some states that were reluctant to approve the document. The document being the Constitution, if it did not contain a Bill of Rights. We have people on the Federalist side that are arguing that the Constitution already protects those things already. Anti-Federalists and smaller states are kind of saying, well, they're kind of weary and they want the Constitution to include protections such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, separation of church and state, the right to a trial by jury, right to property, all these kinds of things. So we do see another kind of another compromise with the Bill of Rights. And so the first 10 amendments are added to the Constitution pretty much right off the bat after the document was ratified. And just some things to note, although we do have the Bill of Rights and we typically think of like, oh, those are great, it's awesome, we're the country that has those, yay, go us. It's important to note that within the Constitution, we don't see special protections or voice given to women. They continue to be marginalized during this time, as we saw with Abigail Adams writing her husband John last week when we looked at the Remember Ladies pieces. We also see suffrage or voting rights still restricted to land-owning white males. So we have more suffrage, yes. More people can vote, more people can participate in the political process, but we still don't have women, and we still don't have a lot of non-land-owning white men as well. And then also very important is slavery continues. And slavery, as I mentioned, is condoned by the Constitution. It's within the Constitution in multiple places. And so the Bill of Rights, all of these protections did not apply to women, did not apply to African Americans, i.e. enslaved persons. All right, so I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Vieira, who's going to continue with discussion about Hamilton.
Okay, so we're going to talk about money. Alexander Hamilton is the first Secretary of Treasury, and really, he is one of the main shot callers at the founding of this country. The first president of the United States is George Washington, but in a lot of ways, George Washington's presidency is really Alexander Hamilton's presidency. So Hamilton is convinced that the most powerful incentive of human actions is their self-interest. And his fear is that the wealthy and the elite will not have a vested interest in the federal government, and therefore it will fail. And so what he tries to do with the process known as assumption is to get the federal government to purchase the debt that the states had. So that way it would make the wealthy and the states want the federal government to succeed. Because if it doesn't succeed, then they're going to lose out on all the debt that they held. That's assumption in a nutshell. And so it says on the slide, the more money the government owed, the more people would want it to succeed, which is kind of a really complex economic idea broken down for you guys. Now, Hamilton gets this passed by Congress, even though many in the conservative side of the country do not want that to be the case. But now the U.S. government is going to have debt, and they're going to have to try and find a way to raise money to pay off some of that debt. Hamilton taxes whiskey. Now, part of the problem with taxing whiskey is that it's incredibly profitable for grain farmers to sell their grain to whiskey distillers to make money. It's actually the most profitable business at the time. And so this leads to, again, another rebellion, this one aptly known as the Whiskey Rebellion. What ends up happening is farmers in Pennsylvania are furious over this excise tax on whiskey that they have to pay. They're losing money. They think that it's unfair. They think that the federal government is not looking out for their best interests. And so in that Enlightenment spirit and the spirit of 1776 again, they rebel. They stop some tax collectors. A couple guys are tarred and feathered, which is way worse than it sounds. Because when you're tarred and feathered, your skin is basically burnt off, and then you look like a chicken, which is an embarrassing way to die. But in kind of a, macho, cool thing, George Washington becomes the one and only American president to actually lead troops into battle while he's president. And so if you can imagine George Washington on his horse. There's the painting there. He leads his troops into battle and quickly puts down the rebellion. Now, again, the rebellion is important for what it shows. And what the Whiskey Rebellion shows us through our historical lens is that the federal government was working and that the federal government was the power in the nation at the time. This won't be something that's put down by local power or by the state power. It's the U.S. Army, led by the President of the United States. So it really shows the force and teeth that the federal government has.
All right, hey guys. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about foreign policy. So this fits into our theme, America and the world. And so we start to see this young nation start to reach out and try to deal with foreign powers. Pretty quickly, colonists realize that the world is increasingly becoming a more globalized sphere, and that trade with other countries is really important. And so we have a number of things going on. And something that was happening is that after the American Revolution, if you remember, Britain and France fought against each other during the Revolution. And that war continued to go on. And so a lot of it was fought on the seas. And so we have the British are impressing American sailors into service. So basically they would take over a ship and say, okay, now you are sailing with the British Royal Navy. You are forced to fight for us now. And that's a thing that really scared a lot of Americans. Americans were fearful, and rightfully so, that trade would be interrupted, that they weren't safe on the world's oceans. And so we have John Jay, who's also serving as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, goes to France and makes a treaty, goes to Britain, makes a treaty with the British, and basically the United States gets some concessions. They do not in impressment, however, but they do get some concessions that you can read more about. We also see that what that starts to do with Jay's treaty is we start to see the Federalists kind of start to go against what will be known as Jeffersonian Republicans. So we're starting to get a little more political parties. And again, we're not going to say that we have political parties yet, but we're starting to see that shift towards it. We also have foreign relations with France in the XYZ affair, in which X, Y, and Z are U.S. officials, and basically the French say, we're not going to deal with you unless you give us a bribe, and that comes back to the Americans, and Americans are really ticked off about it, say that they're being insulted by the French. And so we have some Americans that are saying, we need to go to war against the French. Adams knows and sees that the United States is not ready for that, and so signs a treaty with France. Avoiding a potentially devastating war.